This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Ontario Sewer and Water Main Construction Association. Clean water is everybody's business.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Fry, and with me I have
Kate Wood, Senior Director of Government Relations for the Association of Equipment Manufacturers.
And Kate, I've got a whole bunch of questions about the infrastructure bill, or bill to be. But first, maybe you could tell us what the AEM is all about.
Sure. The Association of Equipment Manufacturers is the North American trade association that represents over 1,000 member companies that manufacture off-highway heavy equipment in the construction, agriculture, forestry, utility, and mining space. We are headquartered in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, with offices in Washington, D.C., Ottawa, and China.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to ask, since we're a Canadian podcast, but we do cover American news too. But you have members in Canada as well.
We do.
And this infrastructure bill affects, well, obviously it definitely affects the U.S., but also in some ways affects Canada. What I would start with is, how does this infrastructure bill, or the proposed parts of it anyway, how do those directly affect your members? What are the biggest chunks of the bill that would be something you'd focus on?
So the thing that really does stand out about this particular comprehensive infrastructure piece of legislation involves the roads, bridges, and highways component. So it does two things. One, it provides a long-term reauthorization of what we call the Federal Surface Transportation Program. So this provides dedicated funding over a sustained period of time to state departments of transportation in all 50 states to kind of plan for a variety of capital improvement projects and things of that nature. That is essentially the bread and butter of our advocacy efforts, especially in the infrastructure space. It ensures that there is stability and predictability in the marketplace for our manufacturers to plan ahead and respond to, procurement or contracting needs and, order requests. The other piece of the larger infrastructure package that is being considered in Washington that really impacts our industry is the additional funding that's been appropriated on top of some of the normal order. But that also doesn't just include roads, highways, and bridges. The pieces of the bill that address funding for broadband infrastructure have a massive impact on our industry, not just because our equipment's used to construct the telecommunications networks that broadband will be reliant upon, but because we've got, equipment on a farm, for example, with the precision ag space, it's heavily reliant on broadband connectivity. And that's a critical piece for our industry. Our agriculture sector also relies on infrastructure. We need to have strong and robust inland waterways, locks, and dams to move product to keep the U.S. agricultural economy strong so that farmers can buy more equipment. So essentially, I say all this because it means a lot of different things to our industry. I think the most obvious is that it's going to help our members in the construction space. But when you really dig into the details, there are a lot of the comprehensive nature of this bill, really provides a lot of other huge benefits for our industry.
Mm-hmm. And my next question, and you may have already answered this with the roads part, is what is the current aspect of American infrastructure that everybody's like, well, we need to pay attention to this. This is the main thing we got to fix.
The thing that really sticks out about this bill is that it's just comprehensive, and there's just so much that needs to be done. There's really not one asset that really stands out. Every asset of U.S. infrastructure needs help. Roads, bridges, and highways are probably the top of mind for most folks because they're commuting to and from, well, at least they were before COVID, right? They're commuting to and from work. They're waiting on their Amazon packages to get to their homes in times. For our members, we are dealing with a lot of supply chain issues. So if we have an infrastructure that's broken or not functioning properly, that's adding to inefficiencies that we're already dealing with. So the roads, bridges, and highways piece is super critical. But frankly, our infrastructure in the United States needs all of it. When you look at the water and wastewater systems, that's a huge issue for communities that is in desperate need. And then we talked again about the broadband piece, right? Folks are working from home, educating their children from home more and more. And I think the broadband gaps and the connectivity issues that this country is facing has really risen to the surface. So it kind of just depends on what's front of mind for people, which frankly is broadband in a lot of times.
Yeah, that leads into my next question, which is, what is your take on the broadband part of it and sustainability, which is also another big part of the equation with this bill, which in previous infrastructure like building in the 50s, that wasn't really anything anybody thought about, but now it's top of mind.
Absolutely. So the definition of infrastructure has broadened significantly over the last decade among the Washington, in the Washington policy community. AEM has been part of making sure that definition has been broadened because we understand how different infrastructure is now than it was, 50 years ago per se. So having broadband, investment in this bill to the tune of about $65 billion is currently where the level is set, is going to be massively helpful across a variety of industries, across a variety of communities. So for us, we're very pleased to see it. As I mentioned, we're going to be part of building that broadband infrastructure out, but we have so many industries and sectors that we're connected to that are going to be heavily dependent upon that. To speak to the sustainability piece, we're very pleased to see that this starts to invest in a more sustainable future for our country. I think infrastructure has a huge role to play in that piece. Our members are acutely aware of sustainability efforts and are doing their part. It's a really exciting space to be in, and I just think the fact that the bill addresses that, in a conservative manner, quite frankly, because this bill has gotten support from Republicans and Democrats, where sustainability might not be as popular. But this bill does it in a way that is responsible, and it does it in a way that is seriously takes a look at what we're dealing with. So we're very pleased to see both broadband and sustainability included in the bill.
And just to sort of lead off of that, you mentioned Republicans and Democrats. Bipartisanship is pretty scarce on the ground these days, and has been for like the last 10 years. And Infrastructure Week was kind of a running joke for the last 4 years, but now it actually looks like it's happening, and because of bipartisanship. So if you could kind of comment on the fact that everybody seems to have actually come together for this thing.
Absolutely. We have long been trying to emphasize on Capitol Hill that infrastructure is neither a Republican or Democrat. It is a bipartisan issue. It always has been, frankly. And to have, for example, just on Tuesday this past week, to have 19 Republican senators support movement and passage out of the Senate with the bipartisan infrastructure package is a huge boost. It's a huge indication that that they understand that this bill, at least for the equipment manufacturing industry, is, from our estimates, going to contribute 100,000 new jobs over the next 2 to 3 years for the industry. It's going to contribute to creating 500,000 manufacturing jobs in the United States over the next 2 to 3 years. These are big numbers for our sector, and that they understand. Those 19 Republicans, for example, and we're appreciative of all the senators who voted to pass this bill out, both Democrat and Republican. But in particular, those 19 Republicans who understand and essentially put politics or policy over politics and move forward on this is just it's a strong sign that there's an understanding of how important this issue is for the country.
And President Biden has emphasized a Buy American approach for infrastructure renewal, but it's a little more nuanced than that for you guys, because you've got Canadian representatives who want to get in on this thing, but Canadians aren't exactly sure where we stand in this whole situation. So maybe you could comment on that in just Buy American from the American company's point of view, and from the fact that there's a lot of back and forth over the border between the two countries.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we're monitoring very closely, and this is something that's been kind of ongoing for the latter part of the last year, right? So Buy America laws and regulations pertain to federal aid projects that relate to infrastructure versus Buy American, which is procurement. So in this instance, we're talking about infrastructure. So these are federally funded transportation projects that are not necessarily carried out by the federal government itself, but currently, helped along, right, by the federal government. And currently, Buy America laws require that all iron and steel are domestically produced. It's important to reiterate, though, for Canadian equipment manufacturers, that equipment used to build infrastructure assets has historically not fallen under Buy America laws and regulations, simply because it's not permanently incorporated into the project like steel and iron. So the new term is that we are effectuators of infrastructure. So therefore, we are not necessarily covered under current Buy America laws. Now, there are efforts to expand that. We haven't included language to incorporate equipment. So that's, from our perspective, that's a wise decision. We're going to continue to emphasize this because, it's important for lawmakers to understand that the tools, the equipment, and the materials, used to effectuate infrastructure, that's my new favorite word, and not permanently incorporated into projects, should not be subject to provisions of Buy America, just simply because, there's it's a complex global supply chain, and we want to continue to position the industry in a way that it can compete very well. From a global perspective, 30% of the equipment produced in the United States is destined for export alone. So we understand the need to kind of ensure that current Buy America provisions are not expanded. We're happy with the status quo.
And I would imagine the sheer scale and ambition of this project means you simply can't. You need to get stuff from all over the place to get this to happen.
Exactly. Yes, and there's that small,
exactly.
Yes.
That minor complaint.
Right.
So AEM Senior Vice President of Government Industry Relations, Kip Eidberg, they called the bill bold and transformational. Could you elaborate on that statement?
Yeah, definitely. So the bill itself is, $1 trillion of investment, 500 of which is above what we would normally spend. So, for example, for like a reauthorization of the Federal Surface Transportation Program that I mentioned, the current Federal Surface Transportation component of that bill is a 35% increase over what was passed in 2015 when the bill was last reauthorized. So across, basically at every level, you have transformational, investment numbers coming out of this. And I think also the fact that it's so comprehensive, that it doesn't just focus on roads, highways, and bridges, that it focuses on ports, locks and dams, electric grid, modernization, broadband, water, wastewater infrastructure. I think that's really what we mean when we say this is truly transformational.
Okay, and finally, if people are interested in seeing more, because I know the AEM puts out regular updates on their positions on these as things change, where should they go to find the latest on AEM's policy opinions on?
Sure, there's two sources. One is the AEM.org website. We are constantly updating that for stakeholders, not just our members. And then the other piece that does a lot of kind of up to the minute reporting is our Twitter handle at AEM Advocacy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Greater Toronto Sewer and Water Main Contractors Association. Clean water, our goal, our future.